Yeah. I often
I've
stick
got
it.
one of those.
Yeah,
Yes, they're very comfy.
they are. They're super, and they're really good for.
Intimo one?
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
Intimo one. Yeah, and it's very useful for microphone packs. I
Look
find.
at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had to wear it quite frequently, and always.
And I've got the
Take this
longer
skirt.
one as well that you can wear as a dress.
Oh, right. Okay, well, this one's a wee bit short for me to wear as a
Yes.
dress.
Well, you're a little bit taller than I am.
Yeah. So let me just see if I can get in as a second person.
Keep going.
Where am I? There I am.
That's right.
And that I should be, hopefully, that means this one. Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. So you're right?
Yeah, we're good. It
Good.
just took me a minute.
Perfect. And you're
Thank
mic'd up,
you.
ready to go, because it will probably have already started recording.
Oh, okay. Spot. Yeah, really. It's great if I'm sitting here because I can see three. So maybe everyone should kind of sit here, and I should stand over there in the middle. Because yeah, so everyone can kind of see that. Yep. Go for it. So hang on. What's my timing? I've got until 11:30. Okay. Yep.
So while we're just taking our seats and getting ready, I'm very conscious of time and I don't want to cut you short with the presenter. I'll introduce myself. I'm Lieutenant Commander Lorraine London. I'm one of the Defence Academy staff and I'm delighted today to have the opportunity to introduce our eminent presenter. Just a quick parish note. Stephen Colby was a session advertised for following this one. Unfortunately, he suffered a misfortune, so he's unavailable. So if you have two choices, you can either go to, for those of you who are able to go to the workshop or Defence closed session. Those of you not so special, I recommend to go and see Professor Kath Ellis, who will be presenting on something else. Okay, again, without too much ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Deborah Touchek. She has joined us today and is going to do have a chat, and it's a nice intimate chat, which is good, on this whole concept of how we engender more collaborative learning in the technology space and the challenges. So I won't waste your time listening to me. I'd like to hand over to Deborah. And again, we're on the time, so I'm sure I'll keep an eye for you.
Great.
But we'd love to hear some questions as well.
Yes, absolutely. As the Lieutenant Commander, is it?
Lorraine. Yes,
Lorraine? Okay. As Lorraine was saying, I do want to get through a lot of the high-level stuff which may or may not be of interest to you, to get to something which I'm really interested in a little bit more towards the end, which is this whole notion of these kinds of things that I've been put up on the board. So I work for a company called Arctis. It's a company that specialises in enterprise architecture. We partner and work very closely with the Department of Defence and a number of other government agencies. They hired me a few months ago to establish a learning capability essentially from scratch because they saw that as a need and something that they wanted to develop going forward. So after many years within the higher education adult learning sector, I've kind of been in a position where it's essentially a greenfield. Okay, so I get to sit down and reflect on learning from kind of a slightly different perspective of where I would usually be. So I get to think about how do I set up the learning system? What kind of learning system do I want? Do I need a learning system? How will I engage that learning system? How are we going to use it? What things do I need to think about in terms of security, interaction and integration with the other environments that we work with? How do I utilize it for all the various different categories of learning that essentially we use both internally and that we will be pushing out externally? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today, about what I'm doing and some of the decisions that we've started to make and how they're being affected in Moodle. And then to talk a little bit more about what it is that we do and some of the tenets that we're working on, and how that has actually encouraged me to rethink a lot of some of the principles underlying engagement in an online sense. So I've referred to this paper as being spheres of learning and influence. Now, for those of you who are very much aware of the term spheres of influence from a geopolitical perspective, it's also quite widely used in business as well, in terms of who can you establish influence with? Whose thinking can you change? How can you affect their decision making? So that actually ties in very nicely with the concept of learning as well, because obviously the more we learn about other people, the more we can influence the way that they think. We can also change and learn ourselves through that interaction as well. So it's not just a one-way street. Now, Senge has been around for a really, really long time, and he came up with the concept of the learning organization. And whilst, as I said, we're primarily an architectural company, so we look at business architecture as well as information architecture and information security architecture. So we're probably not really involved in that systems thinking level of Senge's 5 disciplines. But there are a number of tenets that come out of his work which I think are really valuable in terms of the idea of expansive patterns of thinking and to be able to learn collectively. And I think in the concept of spheres of learning and spheres of influence, I think trying to get people to learn better together is, and to work better together, helps to expand that sphere of influence as we're going out. This is a bit of who we are, but which I've already told you about. Okay, so why Moodle? First and foremost, I've been using Moodle for a really long time, so I'm very familiar with it. We used to run our own Moodle servers at a university in Japan back in 2005. So I've grown along with it. I understand the power, the scalability, the tool sets that come with it, and I was when I went through and I benchmarked it against a lot of the other corporate systems, I found that they were quite lacking in terms of the breadth of options that it would enable for me. Because as I said, I had a real need for both internal and external training requirements. So Moodle fitted the bill in a whole bunch of different ways. And we've been working with Pukunuri to kind of really set up and establish that site over the last couple of months. Oh, wrong button. Okay. So here's the concept of the spheres of learning and influence that I'm working on. And essentially, my belief is that it all starts with the individual. And from the individual, we need to build this idea of the collective learning within the team structure, getting people working together. From there, if we're getting those teams working together, then this can then expand out and start to influence the way the organization works. From there, obviously, we need to be able to affect the industry. And we need to get people involved in what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And then, hopefully, through that, we are also engaging the market and changing the way people think about what it is that we do. Because what we do is a little bit different from a lot of the architectural firms out there. So it's, in a sense, it's also market development and awareness raising, so educating the market all the way back to the individual. Okay, so there are 4 general categories of learning that we are looking to set up. some of which are already up and running and some of which are still under development, and it's a collaborative development with subject matter experts, so it does take a wee bit longer. So we have all of the typical HR learning and development training, all of the onboarding, the compliance aspects, those types of things, product training and awareness, and wherever possible, we're using a flipped model to achieve that. So we have the added advantage of being and working within our domain. So for example, we're just rolled out some product training. We have two different streams of people who take that training. So we have the people who are actually going to have to use and demonstrate the product. And then we have the broader awareness training for people within the company, so that they have a better understanding of what the product does and dispels a lot of myths around what it is and what it is not. So, as I said, collaborating with staff, partners and clients to develop standards, models, frameworks, and accreditation processes is the next stream. We're starting that internally, and we are expanding that one out. So we're starting to engage with clients to get them working with us on these. We're also trying to engage our partners as well, so that we can establish a consortium of people who are working to develop these standards within the industry. The third one is from those developments, we then extract the standardized models of learning which we can package and sell externally to partners, consulting companies, and potentially we can also repurpose generic components of those standardized programs for the fourth category of learning, which is the training services that are tailored for specific clients. Okay, so this might be a wee bit small on your screens. So this just takes you through those four categories. We're taking more of a role-based competency approach for a lot of the training that we're doing. We need to make sure that people can demonstrate their ability to do whatever it is that we're trying to train them in. We also need to ensure that when they've been through that process, that their managers have very ready access to the kinds, to basically getting a really quick overview as to whether they've achieved that particular competency or not. And that's something very valuable from a management perspective. Now, one of the things that we're doing in that category, there we go, that was a bit slow. So for the internal stuff, which are really the blue category of things, we're setting up a mentor role, and this is based on the parent role. If you go to Moodle Docs, there's a lot of information about how you can go about setting that up. But essentially what we're doing is for all of the managers, all of their direct reports are listed, assigned to them as mentees. So essentially they don't get access to the entire profile of each of the learners, but when they log in, they go to a mentees block, and it has a list of all of the people who are their direct reports, and they can click on it and it takes them to their user profile, and they can see what badges they've earned in terms of competency and completion of training, and also they can look at activity reports as well, but that's really the extent of it. And from a management perspective, that's really all they want to see anyway. As I said, using a flipped blended model, so it's not a flipped model in terms of 100% online, which I was doing here at UNSW. This is the flipped model in terms of the blended approach. So we have a lot of contextual conversations to experience things. People have actually seen demonstrations of a product, for example. Then they go through some training, which is the concept exploration aspect of the flipped model. So it takes them through some screencast instructions, there is documentation, there are examples of it actually being used, and that's the concept exploration phase of the flipped approach. And then we take them into the application and demonstration where they sit down and they have to play with the systems and they have to, well, not really play with them, it's a structured approach, which means that they are given a specific audience that they have to set up the scenario for. They have to go through and configure the system, and then they have to present it to the client. But of course the client would be us initially. And then that would be therefore refined. The learning would be brought back into the company. So the learning component gets refined, as well as the understandings of the organization get refined. And then it moves out into the wider marketplace. So we're actually getting them to develop things that they will be using out in the field. Now we're using system enrollment through LDAP for the internal staff. So we're pulling it from Active Directories. Okay, so we have all of our staff listed in Active Directories, and we use the LDAP to suck all of their credentials across and enroll them in various different courses. The course enrollment is being organized through user profile conditional restrictions and role-based cohorts. So I can say this person's a consultant, an admin, a technical person, or whatever cohort they sit in, and then I assign them based on their requirements. So they get a very personalized set of training rather than having to go through parts of courses that are not necessarily relevant to them. This also helps us to deal with, for example, contractors. When we get the really large projects, we quite often have to bring contractors on, bring them up to speed, so we have to onboard them. But they're subject to very specific requirements, which are different to our permanent staff. And so that's why we need to separate what they get given and what the permanent employees will get given. The last point here is what we're working on at the moment, which is really applying what we know, what our subject matter expertise is, to the learning environment. So we're trying to understand who needs the information, who needs the learning, when, where, why, under what terms and conditions, how do we collaborate, what tools do we need to use to collaborate. But the important thing here is it's not necessarily the tools, because there are hundreds of tools for collaboration out there. True collaboration is not a tool. True collaboration is happening between people. And this is what we're trying to work out, is how can we best collaborate and then find a tool which supports that. So the red category of courses, we're going to be setting themes at the category level. I've been assured by Pukanui that this shouldn't degrade the performance of the system because we're not dealing with tens and thousands of courses and people. So we have the luxury of being able to visually separate the two different categories of courses. So what goes out externally is is designed specifically for an external audience. Again, the course differentiation would be according to role. The enrollment, of course, is going to be very different for these category of courses. So we'll be using PayPal, or if we've got a client with a large list of people that aren't going on a one-by-one basis, then we'd probably just use a CSV file or something like that to do the uploads. And we're also piloting the use of badges for authenticating completion. And hopefully that will be strongly uptaken by our audience. Okay, so this gets me to the crux of it. ARCTIS, what does ARCTIS stand for? Architecting Trusted Information Sharing, okay? So for us, it's all about the trust. And we often talk about how information sharing denotes a certain level of trust. So if I'm going to give you information about myself, or anything else for that matter, I have to have a certain level of trust in you that you're going to do the right thing with that information. And perhaps you don't need that information. Do I want to give you that information? Under what terms and conditions am I going to give you that information? So who am I relying on to provide me with the information that I need? And how do I ensure that I get the information I need when I need it? Can I trust them, their systems, their processes, their people, to make sure that they're going to value the information that I value in the same way? So these are some of the problems that we're dealing with. And our basic tenet is that a loss of trust reduces people's capability and willingness to share. And this, from a learning perspective, obviously the metaphor is quite clear. If we're thinking in terms of collaboration, particularly in an online space, and this is something that we're trying to get better and better at. How can we get people to share more about themselves, to establish relationships and rapport online, and to really deeply collaborate within that online context? So I started to think about and to question some of the things that we do. So when we are in a room like this and we're sitting down next to somebody that we don't know, how long does it take us to establish a sufficient rapport that we would be happy to leave all of our worldly possessions, our iPads, our phone, our credit card, with that person and be able to wander away and feel safe that they're going to look after those things until I come back, and then just not going to walk out and use my credit card and I'm going to end up with a massive debt. So how long does it take for us to develop trust? What level of trust do we need to accomplish in an online environment so that people feel comfortable enough to share information? Now, for the longest time, some of the defaults have been, okay, come online, write a paragraph introducing yourself to everybody. Okay, Lorraine over here, she's an expert in deception. Okay, what do we know about the online environment? Okay, what do we know about the online environment? We know that Facebook profiles don't necessarily have to be real. How do we authenticate that those users in our class are really who they say they are? How do we get them to what kind of assurances do they need to have so that the other students within that course feel sufficiently comfortable enough and confident enough to be able to really collaborate with each other? And from my perspective, these are some of the questions that I've really started to ask myself. What do we need? Is a user profile enough? Or does it disengage people? Does it distance people from genuine collaboration? Why is it that so many people here at the Moodle Posium have commented that sitting down at a table and talking to one another is far more collaborative, and we get a lot more out of it. We establish rapport a lot faster than we do online. I had one person who said the best way to establish the rapport in an online environment is to get all the students together in the same room for one session right at the beginning, and then they're right for the rest of the course. Not every
one physical room, one virtual room.
One physical room. So face to face. And so as I'm listening to all of these stories going around, this notion of what do we need to be able to trust enough and be confident enough to be able to put ourselves out there and to genuinely share and have a productive collaboration with our co-participants. From a teacher's perspective, I had a very similar confrontational situation whereby I had a flipped mode, of course, 100% online. I had lots of videos that had me on it. I was sending lots of emails out. I was running collaborate sessions, doing web conferencing. So I was out there, completely out there for all of my students. Not all of them were, though. A lot of them didn't turn their webcams on. Some of them wouldn't speak in the online conferencing. They would lurk. Put a little text message perhaps in the bottom, in the chat window. I would get forum messages or emails from them, but very rarely, for some of them, not all of them, but for some of them, they wouldn't engage me in that very visual way.
Is that trust though or confidence?
Well, this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So what is it that they don't trust the system? Is it because they don't trust the people involved? Is it a confidence that they don't want to be seen? Why do they not want to be seen by other people who are also engaged in the same process? And yet, when they pick up the phone and they call me, they talk to me as if I'm their best friend, because they feel that they know me, just like a teenager might feel that they know their favorite celebrity. So this is something that I would really love to discuss more, and I'm really hoping that this forum here at Moodle Posium can be a starting point for that particular discussion. So I've put in the forum for this particular one, I've started to write down some of those questions to summarize. So if we change the human-to-human paradigm, we've got the human system to human paradigm. So we've got all those layers in between us. So what assurances do we need to really participate well? How can we help our students to engage in a much richer way in the online environment? So there's the forum. Please feel free to contribute to that. As I said, I've started to put a few notes. Lorraine and I had a lovely discussion at the very beginning, so I've just popped down a couple of the things that she was discussing with me, so we've tried to capture it there. But by all means, please jump on and ask other people to contribute to the discussion as well, because I think it's something that we as teachers really need to reflect on if we want to really develop the ability to have these good, sustainable, deep, rich collaboration sessions in an online environment.